and I just thought you would like to know the ins and outs of what it's like to build up in the loft. It's always good to know in advance what you're going to be up against. Hello again, and welcome back to a hot Wood Hill Park. This one is going to be a bit different really. I just thought I'd talk about the location that I'm in, i.e. the loft, and its challenges. I'm sure if you build a layout in the shed you've got a whole different lot of challenges, and that goes for a garage and a bedroom, but I thought I would pass on my experiences of building a layout in the loft and the challenges that it brings. I would say one of the first challenge you have to overcome is the material you build it out of, and if you get it wrong, the temperatures up here that sometimes go from a high of nearly 40 degrees down to maybe only a couple of degrees in the winter will play havoc with a lot of materials. So the wood you build it out of is really important, and you really need to think it through. MDF takes on moisture and it will twist and distort as it expands and contracts. The only way you can deal with it is to seal it with like a watered down PVA mix and try and stop the moisture getting into it. But it's also a very heavy material which you're adding to your loft weight wise. You can build it out of many other woods. I mean, I suppose you can use sort of beech, you could probably use decking if you wanted to, but they all have their drawbacks of being heavy and sort of can distort. And really there's only one product that is safe to build in this environment without having trouble, and that is plywood. Plywood is my go-to every time, and I wouldn't build a layout in the loft unless it was plywood. Now the thickness can make a difference as well. I wouldn't really go below probably about 10 mil. I think it's 9 mil you can get, but I built most of my layout out of 12 mil ply. So this is really strong, and it's laminated. It's a lamination of layers of wood with glue, and this can distort, so it's worth sealing it as well with a watered down PVA mix or another sealant of your choice, and you'll have pretty good results with it. But you really have to think it through when you build something in a loft. Now when I started building this layout for real, instead of previous layouts where I just had a sort of go at it, I did quite a bit of research and looked at people online, their experiences and the problems that they've had, and I drew my own conclusions from that sort of material really. But it is pretty logical. You know, wood continually moves with heat and cold and moisture and dryness. So, and it's a living material, so it's always going to move to some degree. I would probably say the next thing is laying of the track. Laying of the track is so important if you don't want big headaches further down the line, pardon the pun. I lay all my track on caulk. I think it's 3mm caulk I used all around the layout, and that's stuck down with Copydex, and then the track is also stuck down with Copydex on top of the caulk, and this allows for a nice ballast shoulder as well. But you've got to leave expansion gaps. So if you're doing it in the summer, like I'm sitting here now, and I think it's 33 degrees at the moment, and it has been a lot hotter than this. If you start laying track at the moment, you probably could almost butt it up together, you know, put the fish plates on and almost butt it together, because it's probably going to be at its maximum expansion due to the temperature. And come winter, that will contract and leave you probably a 1 to 2 mil gap. It does, you know, move quite a bit the track, and can expand to quite a degree if you actually build a layout in cold weather. So if you do build a layout during the winter, make sure you leave at least 1.5 to 2 mil gap in some cases. You don't need to do it everywhere, you just need to provide a gap between each section, especially if they're flexible track, which are, I think, well, they're a metre long. You definitely want to provide sort of a 1.5 mil gap either end of that if you're building it during the winter, because come summer it's going to distort and you're going to have big problems. So in some ways it's actually best to build a layout in sort of, I suppose, a building season, which I would say would be spring and autumn, and it's more of a temperate climate, so things aren't too hot and they're not too cold. So if you build it autumn or spring, you tend to have the ability to leave sort of a small gap between each piece of track you lay, whereas you're going to have to guess big time if you build it in the winter to how much it's going to expand right in the middle of the summer with this sort of heat we're getting at the moment. And it is so important, and if you get it wrong you're going to get derailments all over the place, and you may even have a problem where you've got a derailment underneath a tunnel that you've put together, and you're going to find it hard to access to even repair the track, and you'll end up pulling your wonderful layout apart just to get to the track to repair it. So it is really important to get the track right and think about the temperatures in the loft. Due to the temperatures at the moment in the loft, I'm actually struggling to find two pieces of track with a gap between them. As you can see here, there's a slight gap on the lower rail out of the sort of rail you can see, but there's no gap at the top. So the expansion has sort of completely taken place and there's just no room for expansion now, but it probably is at its maximum temperature, and so it shouldn't get any hotter than this, and so the rail shouldn't expand anymore. But you can see what I mean, they pretty much butt up completely when they get really hot up here in the loft. Come summer, oh, beg your pardon, come winter there'll be quite a gap between those rails, even though you can't see one at the moment, unless you look at the lower one, has got a slight gap there's a slight gap in there. I can just put my fingernail in, but there's nothing at the top. They are totally butted together due to the heat. Another thing to think about is damage from light. If you put roof windows in like I've done, you've got to think about what way you want them to face. Now I chose them to face north because I didn't want sunlight coming into the loft and the UV damaging my rolling stock. That window is directly above what you can see now on camera, and if sunlight was beaming down on top of these locos, over time the UV could break down the plastic and damage, well, it would actually fade the paint and just damage the locos, you know, over time. And nowadays the cost of locos, they are very precious and expensive things to replace, so the last thing you want to do is damage them with sunlight. Years ago this was even more of a problem, as plastics weren't as stable as they are nowadays, and sort of rolling stock of the Triang era and sort of early sort of 60s, 50s rolling stock, the plastic would sort of distort and sort of go into a banana shape. I mean, I've bought Triang coaches when I was younger that were like bananas, and that's because the plastic wasn't stable when it was heated. Obviously nowadays processes are so much better, but you don't want to take the risk of any damage anyway, just in case, because things do distort with extreme heat, plastics being one of them. If you really are worried about your rolling stock, especially the precious locos that you deem sort of really important, you may want to box them up and take them down into the house to keep them out of the extreme temperatures. But you know, unless it's absolutely necessary, this is a whole lot of work, and it's a seasonal thing that you're going to have to keep up with. But in my experience, I haven't really had issues on the layout. The windows did help a lot with keeping the temperature down. It's just the extreme heat we've had lately has been a bit of an issue, but I'm not too concerned. But what I do worry about is running them in this heat. Running them in this heat is a worry. There's a few reasons really. One of them is just overloading the system, you know, because it's hot, you're driving the DCC controller too hard, and the fan's on all the time, and you stand a chance of components burning out and motors burning out. But on top of that, because of the heat, lubrication starts to dry out, and it's something that you need to keep a constant check on, and you might need to re-lubricate some of your stock as you sort of come out of summer, and you might hear the odd squealing noise or sort of squeaky wheels on wagons and stuff, because the lubrication has dried out due to the extreme temperatures. And you need to address this so you don't do any damage. Obviously you can fit air conditioning at a cost, but it's not usually a practical thing to do, so you end up with fans and just air movement to cool the loft, which isn't really up to the job when you get to the extreme temperatures of summer, and you get days like we've had just lately. You even get some of your sort of undergrowth and stuff that you've been working on, your scenery. If it's a natural product, it will dry out and it will become brittle and break, there's not a lot you can do about it. You can sort of try and moisten them with like a matte media, but that doesn't stay sort of moist forever and does dry out, and you can end up with bits of your scenery falling apart as things dry out and they age over the years of being hot in the loft. One of the major decisions I took when I started to build this new layout was to have all resin buildings or plastic buildings and not have cardboard buildings, because cardboard distorts with heat and cold, and it takes on moisture if it's not sealed, and can be a whole lot of sort of issues, or have a whole lot of issues and problems. And sometimes they take quite a lot of work to build these cardboard kits, only to see it all fall into bits due to the heat or the cold. It is infuriating. Plus, if you get any sunlight on them, they normally all fade and lose all their colouring. So I started building the layout, adding pretty much generic buildings like you see in front of you by Bachmann and sort of Hornby and other manufacturers. But over time I've got into scratch building, and I now enjoy scratch building, but I very rarely build much out of cardboard. Yeah, I build it out of plasticard and Foamex board and any material that doesn't really take on moisture or can distort too much in the heat. And so far I've had good results. Bearing in mind this layout is now, I think, 6 years old, or nearly 6 years old, possibly actually 6 years plus, and I've had very few issues with track sort of expansion problems and kit build products that are made of plastic distorting or anything like that, even though it does sort of get to an extreme temperature up here. So I can speak from experience, but so far what I've done has worked, and I just thought you would like to know the ins and outs of what it's like to build up in the loft. It's always good to know in advance what you're going to be up against, and I just thought I would give you some pointers. Now, one of the very latest things I've done is I've just been weathering these tanks over here, these fuel tanks. They are made of cardboard, they're cardboard tubing and painted and whatever, but they're pretty stable. There's some plastic and plasticard involved, but they're pretty stable. I'm quite happy with them. There's a bit of I think a slight card wall down here, so not everything, you know, does give you issues, but on the whole I do steer clear of it. And one of the things I've done just lately is clad this chimney here. I mean, it looked terrible, it was just a grey, and I thought I'd put some plasticard on it and bend the plasticard in the shape of sort of half a chimney, because it's low relief. And I weathered it, and I think it came out quite well really. It looks a lot better than it did in the background, but I used some hot melt glue to glue it on, and it probably wasn't the best choice, because within 24 hours it all come off, just pinged undone and fell off. So I had to take it away and use a different glue. And that's one of the issues, is what glue to use in the loft. Most glues will do most jobs, but some will just give out, especially if they're under tension like this is, because it's sort of rounded round the chimney and it's under stress all the time and wanting to come away from it. So I ended up using super glue, but it is trial and error. This may still come apart with the extreme heat we're having at the moment, or with the damp and cold that you get in the winter. But it doesn't get too damp up here, so I'm pretty lucky in that respect, because it's partially insulated loft. But it's things like that. You might want to use Aradite in certain situations, two-part epoxies. Super glues work, but super glues are prone to sort of releasing if they get damp. Things like Evo Stick are very good. Copydex is not bad. Copydex is water-based, so this can be its undoing. But then if you seal it in, like when you, in my case, you use Copydex to put the track down and the cork. If you seal it in by putting ballast and then PVA glue over it, then there's no way that any moisture can penetrate to the Copydex. Then there's no issue, because it's sealed in to the actual scene, if you know what I mean. So glues are very important to think about when you're building in a loft. What type of glue is going to stand up to the temperatures and the general environment. The one thing I can say about building in the loft, in the summer it does aid you doing scenery, because things dry really quick and you can really motor on with building your layout, especially the scenics. But come winter, it's the opposite. Nothing dries. So as you've probably seen me in some of my previous videos, I get a fan out and I blow just ordinary air across what I want to dry, and that does speed up the drying times, albeit a lot slower than the summer. So pluses and minuses really, with extreme temperatures in both directions. Another thing you can do is modify things to withstand some of the heat in the loft. And my Dynamis, it had grills over the fan here. Now if you've got kids, you'd be worried about them putting their finger in there, but us adults are usually quite sensible and we don't tend to stick fingers in things. Not as if it would do any harm to your finger, it would just like probably damage the fan or slow the fan up if you touch it, which I've done accidentally a couple of times. But taking the grill away allows for more airflow, and it also quietens the unit. And at the other end I did the same, even though there's no fan at this end, I just took the grill away. That allows for better airflow when the fan does work, blowing through the unit. But it's still extremely noisy, and just lately I've had a look and looked inside and wondered what else I could do. Now there's just a flat board in there, and the board has got components hanging down that the fan blows on if they get hot. One of them is a processor chip, and I think there's just other semiconductors in there that get really hot and stand a chance of burning out, so the fan cuts in to cool them. And in these temperatures, once the fan comes on, because it's reached temperature, it doesn't really go off, not like in normal use in sort of I suppose spring and autumn and winter. But the extreme temperature in summer, the fan just doesn't seem to go off at all, and it's very noisy. As in my last update you might have noticed, the fan on this screaming and sounding like somebody with a chainsaw in the background as well. Now I got a bit fed up with the fan coming on so often, so I thought I'd add some more ventilation to it, and I found it strange that they never put any ventilation underneath. So what I did, I checked very carefully that there was nothing I was going to damage, and I pretty much turned the underneath of the Dynamis into a Swiss cheese. But this allows a hell of a lot more airflow, and believe it or not, it's almost silent now because the fan is not fighting against an enclosed area. It's blowing out of all these holes, so it's a lot quieter, and it doesn't come on as often. It hasn't totally cured the problem because it is really hot up here, but as it cools down to a more normal temperature, I think that fan's going to be on less and less. And I do wonder why not adequate ventilation wasn't added to this unit, really. But as I said, you can modify things carefully yourself to adapt to the climate that you're in. Just a little bit of thought, a little bit more ventilation, and just exposing hot components to more moving air, really. So you could add a fan. I did wonder about adding another fan at the other end, or add a bigger fan. You can do a few things to adapt units that you've got that are being used in extreme temperatures, that being one of them. Also, if you do run things, maybe don't run them as fast, and maybe don't run so many at once. Maybe just run one loco, and if you feel it's rather warm up here, then make the decision to not run anything today, just in case you burn a motor out. And it pays to check them, put your hand on them every so often, make sure they really aren't getting too hot. Even this camera that I'm filming on, I can feel the heat as I'm holding it. Every electrical component gets extra hot in these temperatures. I would just like to take a moment just to wish Alan at Dragon Junction 2 well after his recent serious illness. Hopefully you're on the mend now, and it looks like you are. So all the best, mate. Take care and get well soon. Even though my loft is partially insulated with this bubble wrap tin foil, it doesn't keep the heat out. And if you put even Celotex or the insulation you can buy instead of this, you'll find it will keep the heat out to start with, and then over a number of days it will just work against you and actually hold the heat in. So insulation in the loft is not really any use when it comes to hot temperatures. It just can't keep the temperatures out unless you've got aircon, which is constantly pumping cold air into the loft. The insulation just won't work long term. Ventilation with windows is worth doing, but it doesn't cure it completely. It just lowers the temperature down by a few degrees, gives you more light, and a place to pump the hot air out of, really, with a fan like I've got here. But it's by no means a cure. You are the top part of your house, which is the hottest place in your house, pretty much. Now, as well as having a window, I think it's worth having netting over the window. This does inhibit airflow to a certain degree, but you don't want some angry wasp or hornet coming in the loft and chasing you around so you have an accident and fall down the ladder or whatever trying to get away from it. So I think it's really important to have netting across your windows to stop anything undesirable coming in. I've never had a pigeon come in yet, but you never know. So something to dissuade insects and birds from coming into your loft is important in my books, as well as shading as well. I did a bit of shading up this one, just so I noticed it was sort of coming down on the layout at certain points, so very little sunlight actually hits the layout. Occasionally, if the wind sort of moves the shading, you might get a glimmer of light on the layout, but it works quite well, and it's just velcroed up. It was just one of those sort of magnetic net doors that nets across the door that you can buy, and I just cut it to size and made my own sort of section up that netted the window either end, and it's just velcroed up, so I can pull it down and clean the window at any time I want to. It works for me, and touch wood, I've never had anything chase me around the loft. I've had issues with my vinyl sort of back sheets, as you can see at the moment. When it gets really hot, they stretch and wrinkle, and these wrinkles disappear in the winter but reappear in the summer, and it's a phenomenon with just the vinyl ones. My ordinary paper ones I've got don't do that, but the vinyl ones are so much more vibrant. They do look better when they aren't wrinkled, so I've left them as is and I just tolerate it. I could put new ones in place, but the chances are they'll go the same way and look like this in summer again. So one day I may replace them, just as I update things, but I'm not rushing. I did wonder whether to actually apply them in this heat, if I could actually stand doing the job in this sort of temperature, because they would be at their maximum expansion. But then chances are when it gets to winter they would wrinkle or look wrong in another way. So it is one of those issues that you get in a climate that's constantly varying. Now if you're in a bedroom, the chances are that won't happen, and I don't know, garage, you might be able to keep more of a constant temperature and it probably wouldn't happen either. But it is an issue I think you would get in a shed with hot and cold. But just one of those things. It's a material, a plastic again, vinyl really, and it's prone to expanding and contracting. There are safety issues as well to think about, because you could have inflammable things up in the loft using sort of IPA, alcohols, very volatile, and you need to think about fires, a risk of fire. So if you've got a lot of inflammable stuff, you might want to take that downstairs out of the loft in the heat, and think about not leaving any electrics on up here when you're sort of not using it. Make sure it's totally isolated so there's nothing that could spark a fire. God forbid you get one, and if you do get one, you need one of these. I've got a CO2 fire extinguisher over here, and it's near the loft hatch, so should I have a problem, hopefully I could put it out and get down the loft hatch, which is just here, which is another safety issue in the loft. You've got to watch you don't fall down it. So I do have a piece of wood that fits in the hole, and most of the time it's in it, but it's not in it at the moment because of the heat. So if you do leave it exposed like that, you've got to be extremely careful, because you can do a lot of damage if you fall down one of them ladders. So there's safety issues as well in this sort of heat. Now everything creates heat as well. The lighting, be it LED lighting, still produces a certain amount of heat, and that just adds to the loft temperature. But on the whole, it's a good environment to build a layout, because it's out of sight and generally doesn't bother anybody in the house. It's a spare bit of space that isn't quite a proper room, but it's drier possibly than a shed, and especially if you've got a shed with a leaky roof, because your house, hopefully you've got a better roof, as you should look after it, as everything you own and value is underneath it. So you should have a good roof on your house, which means all your layout is pretty safe underneath it. And I mustn't forget about what I heat the loft with, even though it seems a distant memory, being freezing cold up here again. But it will soon come round again, and winter will be here. And what I use is quite an economical small fan heater, just to get the loft up to a reasonable temperature. And if I'm not going to stay up here, that's all I'll use. But if I'm up here for a long time, I will use a panel heater, a ceramic panel heater, as they're more economical. And this will be on, and it's usually enough unless the temperatures are really extreme, and keeps it reasonably comfortable for me. But that's a bit of a way off at the moment, and not in my thoughts due to the heat we're having at the moment. Well, I'm not going to run anything today, purely because it's too hot and I don't want to damage anything. So I will be waiting for a cooler evening or cooler day, and I'll get running trains again. But for now, Woodhill Park is stationary. I'm not sure if I've covered everything. There's loads of things you can think of, but they're the main things that I've come up against when I built this layout. And it's getting even hotter up here at the moment, so right, I'll draw this one to a conclusion, as the temperatures, even for me, are getting too much, and I need to go downstairs and have a drink. So hopefully this is of some help to especially new builders in the loft, and it helps you make decisions that may stop you having issues in the future. So thanks again for watching. Cheers. Bye for now.